The story I'm about to share is one that has been told in whispers, often dismissed as an urban legend by locals. But those who truly know swear it's real. They say the small, decrepit motel off Highway 9 is cursed. Some even believe it's haunted. Only one thing is certain. It's a place where people disappear. It starts with a young couple, Sam and Marissa, who were on a cross-country road trip. They'd planned their route meticulously, but as night approached, a storm rolled in, fierce and relentless. Visibility dropped to nothing, and they were miles from their intended stop. With each passing mile, the wind screamed louder, and rain battered the car as if it had a vendetta against them. They knew they couldn't go on like this. Finally, just off the road, they saw it. The faint, flickering neon sign for the Red Pine Motel. It was the kind of place that screamed last resort, but desperate and exhausted, they agreed to spend the night there. The parking lot was empty, except for a rusted-out station wagon that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. They entered the lobby, a dimly lit space with yellowed wallpaper peeling off the walls and an overpowering stench of mildew. An elderly woman behind the desk glanced up as they walked in. Her eyes were cold, distant, and her expression never changed from a blank stare. Sam cleared his throat, asking for a room. She didn't respond at first. She just stared at them with an odd, unsettling intensity, then finally, wordlessly, handed them a key for room 6. As they walked to their room, Marissa whispered, "I don't like this place. There's something wrong about it." Sam brushed it off, joking that they were in the middle of a Stephen King novel. They unlocked the door to room 6 and entered, flicking on the single, dim bulb dangling from the ceiling. The room was as dismal as the rest of the place. Dingy walls, a stained carpet, and a bed that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Just as Marissa was about to complain, they heard a sound from the room next door, a muffled, low sobbing. Marissa's eyes widened. Someone else is here. Maybe they're just, having a hard time, Sam suggested, though he felt uneasy. He wanted to ignore it, but Marissa was insistent. They pressed their ear against the wall, trying to make out more. Suddenly, the sobbing stopped, replaced by the sound of shuffling feet, as if someone was pacing back and forth. Then, nothing. Just silence. After a moment, Sam decided to check it out. He left Marissa in the room and walked to the door of room 7, gently knocking. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door creaked open, just an inch. It was dark inside, the faint glow from the hallway revealing only shadows. Sam called out, but no one responded. After a moment, he returned to his own room, shrugging it off as someone too upset to talk. They both tried to sleep, but something felt off. Every time they closed their eyes, they'd hear strange noises, scratching, whispers, faint cries. Hours seemed to drag by until Sam finally drifted off. Marissa, however, lay awake, every fiber of her being on edge. Around 3 a.m., she heard it again, the sobbing. This time it was closer, clearer, as if it were coming from right outside their door. Heart pounding, she got up and looked through the peephole. She could make out a figure, but something about it was off, almost inhuman. The shape was wrong, the proportions twisted, elongated. She stumbled back, terrified. She shook Sam awake, but he was groggy and irritated. "It's just your imagination, Marissa. Go back to sleep." Defeated, she lay back down, clutching the blanket as if it were her only protection. The next morning, they were eager to leave. Sam went to check out, but when he entered the lobby, there was no one there. He rang the bell on the desk, and after a long pause, the same elderly woman appeared, shuffling slowly from a back room. She stared at him with that same cold, blank expression. Sam handed her the key and asked, "Was there someone in room 7 last night?" "We heard noises." The old woman's face twisted slightly, the hint of a smile almost mocking. "Room 7?" she said in a raspy voice. "There hasn't been anyone in room 7 in over 20 years. Sam felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean?" She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "The last guest in room 7, well, they never checked out." At that moment, Marissa called out to him from the parking lot. He quickly turned and walked out, feeling an overwhelming urge to get as far away from this place as possible. They got into their car and sped off, eager to put the Red Pine Motel behind them. As they drove, Marissa glanced back at the building, only to see the figure from the night before standing in the window of room 7, watching them leave. They didn't speak much after that. Sam tried to rationalize it, to convince himself that it was just a strange, rundown motel, and the woman was just a creepy but harmless old lady. But deep down, he knew there was more to it. A few months later, Sam saw a news report on TV. A family had vanished from their car while driving along Highway 9, their abandoned vehicle found just a few miles from the Red Pine Motel. Chills ran down his spine as he remembered the night he and Marissa had almost stayed there, in that cursed place. A sense of dread washed over him. Maybe, just maybe, they were the lucky ones who got away. There's a story told by long-haul truckers who drive along desolate roads late at night, a tale that no one ever truly believes until they experience it themselves. The story goes like this. Years ago, a man named Jack Delaney owned a small motel on the edge of an old interstate, surrounded by miles of nothing but barren land and scrubby desert. Jack was a bit of an eccentric, known for keeping odd hours and even odder company. Travelers would check into his motel, and sometimes they'd never check out. They say Jack had a strange fascination with keeping his guests. No one knows exactly what that means, but rumor has it that when the motel closed down, they found disturbing evidence in the rooms. Chains bolted to the walls, strange carvings on the floor, and faded bloodstains that didn't quite wash away. Eventually, the place was shut down and Jack vanished without a trace. The locals claimed he either disappeared into the desert or he was never truly human to begin with. For years, no one dared touch the abandoned building. Then, about a decade ago, a new company took over the property. They renovated the old motel, gave it a fresh coat of paint, put up new signs, and opened it up under the name Sunny Trails Inn. But despite its new look, travelers who stayed there often found the experience unsettling. The staff was polite but distant, and the rooms felt somehow wrong, too silent, as if waiting. One such traveler, a woman named Lila, found herself stranded there on a late-night drive through the desert. Her car had broken down, and her cell phone had no signal. She spotted the glowing vacancy sign in the distance, and with no other options, she pulled into the empty parking lot of the Sunny Trails Inn. The front desk was empty, the bell echoing in the quiet lobby when she rang it. After a long pause, a man finally appeared. He looked ordinary enough, dusty brown hair, faded clothes, but his eyes were empty, like he was watching her from somewhere far away. "I need a room for the night," she said. "Room 13 is open," he replied with an odd, almost mechanical smile. Lila handed over her credit card, but he shook his head. "Cash only." She handed over some bills, and he slid a key across the counter. No receipt, no explanation, just a nod toward the hallway. Room 13 was at the very end of the long, dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper that curled at the edges, and the smell of something damp and stale filled the air. As Lila inserted the key and opened the door, she immediately felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but it was late, and she was exhausted. She just needed a few hours of sleep. The room itself was bare bones. A sagging bed, an ancient TV, and a single window covered with thick, moth-eaten curtains. Lila set her things down and tried to settle in, but there was something strange about the air, like it was heavier, claustrophobic. She tried to ignore it and lay down, pulling the thin blanket over herself. But no matter how tired she was, sleep wouldn't come. After what felt like hours of staring into the dark, she finally got up and went to the bathroom. That's when she noticed something strange. The bathroom mirror was oddly reflective, almost too clear, as if someone were looking back at her. As she stared into it, she swore she could see a shadow moving behind her. But when she turned around, nothing was there. Then she heard a faint scratching noise, almost like nails dragging against wood. It was coming from the closet. Her heart pounded as she slowly approached the closet door. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mouse or a draft, but the scratching was too steady, too deliberate. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the handle and yanked the door open. Inside, she found an empty, pitch-black space. But before she could sigh with relief, something caught her eye. Scratched into the wood on the inside of the door were words. "Get out while you can. He's still here." Lila stumbled back, horrified, as a chill ran down her spine. She tried to calm herself, to convince herself it was just some prank. But then the scratching sound returned, louder now, coming from the walls all around her. Panicked, she grabbed her bag and fled the room, barely managing to lock the door behind her as she ran down the corridor. As she reached the lobby, she found it deserted. No one at the front desk, no lights, just silence. The place seemed even older, more decayed than it had appeared earlier. Then, she noticed something strange on the wall. A row of old photographs, all black and white, showing previous owners and guests over the years. And there, in the center, was a photograph of Jack Delaney himself, the same man who had checked her in that night. Her heart nearly stopped. She bolted out of the motel, only to realize that her car, still in the parking lot, had somehow been repaired. The engine was running, the headlights glowing. Shaken but desperate to get away, she jumped in and sped off, glancing in the rearview mirror only once. What she saw made her blood run cold. In the lobby window, she could make out Jack Delaney watching her leave, his expression frozen in an eerie smile. But next to him, shadowy figures moved, figures of people she hadn't seen earlier, each with that same vacant, lifeless stare. Lila drove all night, refusing to stop, too afraid to look back. When she finally reached the next town, she tried to report what had happened, but no one believed her. She tried searching for any information about the Sunny Trails Inn and the man who'd checked her in, but all she could find were articles about an old, abandoned motel that had been shut down years ago after several disappearances. No one would listen. But every now and then, when a desperate traveler finds themselves stranded on that lonely stretch of highway, they might still see that glowing vacancy sign in the distance. But those who know the story say one thing is certain. If you find yourself at the Sunny Trails Inn, don't ever stay in room 13. The story I'm about to share is one that many townsfolk wish would fade into rumor, something to be told around a campfire for thrill alone. But this is not one of those stories. This happened in a small mountain town where people go missing, and the reason why no one stays at the Green Pines Motel anymore. On a cold October night, Daniel was driving up through the dense forest that surrounded the town. He was on his way to a friend's cabin for the weekend. But a heavy fog settled over the mountains, thick as cotton, reducing visibility to just a few feet. Daniel was exhausted and frustrated. His GPS had long lost signal, and he was pretty sure he was completely lost. Finally, as he made a bend around a curve, he spotted a faintly glowing sign in the distance. Green Pines Motel. Vacancy. He hadn't planned to stop, but exhaustion made the decision for him. He pulled in, noticing the dilapidated state of the place. Cracked paint, half-lit sign, empty parking lot. He'd have passed it up if he had any other options. The front lobby was even creepier, decorated with dusty faux plants and old hunting trophies mounted on the wall. An old bell sat on the desk, tarnished and green with age. When he rang it, there was a shuffling sound found from the back, and an old man with an unsettlingly wide smile shuffled out. "Evening, young fella," the man said, handing Daniel a key before he even asked for a room. "Room 4. Just don't wander around too much tonight." Daniel found this odd, but he was too tired to care. He thanked the man and left, feeling the man's eyes on him all the way to his room. Room 4 was better than he expected. Old, but at least it had clean sheets and a working heater. He unpacked a few things, splashed his face with cold water, and collapsed on the bed, his eyes closing as soon as his head hit the pillow. But just as he was about to drift off, he heard it. A faint knocking sound coming from above him. It was slow and deliberate, like someone tapping their knuckles on the ceiling. Confused, he sat up, listening carefully. The knock came again, this time a little louder. It sounded like it was coming from the attic. Trying to shake off the unease creeping over him, he tried to convince himself it was nothing, a tree branch, a loose pipe. But just as he settled back down, he heard it again. This time it was a dragging sound, like something heavy being scraped across the floor. Despite his fear, he grabbed the small flashlight he always kept in his backpack and opened his door, glancing around. The hallway was completely empty, but the sounds persisted, now seeming to come from the end of the hall. Heart pounding, he followed them, his footsteps echoing as he walked toward the source. At the end of the hall, he saw it, a pull-down ladder, half open, leading up into the attic. The noise was louder here, a faint, rhythmic creak like someone slowly swinging back and forth. Against his better judgment, Daniel climbed the ladder, pushing the trapdoor open and shining his flashlight into the darkness above. The attic was a cramped, dusty space with cobwebs hanging like lace from the rafters. As he swept his flashlight around, he caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. A figure, hanging from a noose in the center of the room, slowly swaying back and forth. But that wasn't the worst of it. The figure was facing away, but as Daniel stared in horror, its head slowly turned, revealing a pair of sunken, lifeless eyes. The mouth opened, as if to scream, but no sound came out. He was frozen in place, the air thick with the stench of decay, until suddenly the light flickered, and the figure disappeared. He stumbled back, nearly falling off the ladder in his rush to escape. He ran back to his room, locking the door behind him, his breath coming in panicked gasps. He tried to convince himself it was just a hallucination, the product of exhaustion and a creepy old building. But when he checked the time, he realized only minutes had passed, even though it felt like he'd been up there for hours. The rest of the night was a blur of strange noises, whispers coming from the walls, faint footsteps outside his door, and once the sound of something dragging itself down the hall, just outside his room. He barely slept, jumping at every noise until the first light of dawn broke through the window. Determined to get as far away from the place as possible, he packed his things in record time and headed for the lobby. But as he stepped outside, he froze. There in the daylight, he saw what he hadn't noticed in the fog the night before. The motel was a ruin. Windows shattered, the sign broken and hanging by a thread. Weeds grew thickly around the building, and it was clear that no one had been there for years. Heart pounding, he walked back toward his room, trying to make sense of it, but all he found was a shell of a building with no signs of life anywhere. He ran to his car, glancing back once as he pulled out of the lot. In the upstairs window of room 4, he saw a figure, just barely visible, a man staring down at him with that same wide, unsettling smile. Daniel never spoke of his experience again. But some say that, on foggy nights, travelers on the mountain road can still see the Green Pines Motel, its sign faintly flickering in the mist. And every now and then, someone will pull over, desperate for a place to stay, only to find themselves in a waking nightmare.